everyone, my name is Bridget Volk and this is my presentation on the Paul Levy case study about Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center. This is going to examine Paul Levy in his position as the CEO at the BIDMC in his first 6 months on the job. All right, so November and December. In November, Paul met with the search coordinator in order to interview for the job. One of the things that he discussed with them was, establishing a foundation and framework before receiving the Hunter Report. And the Hunter Report is an assessment of basically all of the shortcomings and the failings of the current situation of the BIDMC. And what Paul was saying is that he wanted to be in the job by the first week of January. And he wanted to do that. The search committee suggested kindly that maybe he wait until after the Hunter Report, but he was really adamant about not fixing blame and fixing the problems. So he didn't want to just receive the Hunter Report after the fact. He wanted to take full responsibility for it and move on from there, and wanted to establish a foundation and framework within which it would be received. So he was unanimously decided to be hired. In the beginning, he met with the Attorney General to talk about whether the medical center was worth saving, and Paul had a history with the Attorney General and talked to the Attorney General and their assistant and talked about how it is worth saving. And one of the other options, as opposed to that, was selling to a for-profit organization. One of the deterrents to doing that would be the loss of the Harvard affiliation, so the doctors would no longer be Harvard doctors, and that was a detriment to selling for a for-profit organization. And Paul's existing relationship with the Attorney General was definitely one of his strengths in this situation, and it allowed him to sway them to really give Paul a shot in turning the medical center around. So he didn't want to lose that Harvard affiliation as well. So January 7th was Paul's first official day in the job. One of his strengths was really dealing with the press. So the Boston Herald published an article noting how there would be 700 possible layoffs, which alarmed some people. But Paul really reiterated the fact that he was focused on the quality of care in the face of layoffs. He sent an introductory email out explaining that, and he talked to the Herald. And after receiving the Hunter Report, he made the report available to all employees of the BIDMC. Part of that, he explained, had to do with honesty with employees, openness, and inclusiveness. And he really wanted to include everyone in the whole process of what was going on. Another thing that was noted was that the care group structure was problematic. There was no CEO at the time, and the Herald, which is a newspaper, referred to it as a chain of weakening links. So at this point, Paul committed to a strategic plan, which would include specific financial targets, broad financial measures, and actual milestones to be held accountable for. All right, February. So February talked a little bit about lifting people's spirits. Once again, he sent out a general email to the staff. That's another one of Levy's strong points, was that open communication with staff. So at this point, he had already made the Hunter Report available to all staff. And he attempted to send out an email to lift people's spirits, and what I really liked about the case study was that it was at this time that the Patriots had just won the Super Bowl, and what Levy had said is that if the Patriots can do it, we can do it too. So he sent out a message to all the employees. There was an introductory letter to the strategic plan, which included principles and vision. Something that was important to Levy was retaining and maintaining the reputation as a warm, caring environment, as Boston is a highly competitive market for hospitals. And it was important to maintain their role as an academic medical network. So having that Harvard affiliation, once again, was really important. Levy explained that the Hunter Report was good and objectively sound. And it was a really good analysis of why previous plans had failed. So, Paul talked a little bit more about how he presented a strategic plan. His strategic plan had no contingency plan. He said that it must work, and the board of directors would approve it or he would quit. So that's what was happening there. It talked a little bit more about getting to know the staff. Groups were looking for information and reassurance mainly, and then this is where the issue with chiefs was first brought about. The chief of service expressed objections. He wanted to know why no chiefs were on the committee. it was said that chiefs claimed that they were never consulted, although they usually were. Levy believed that they were too high up to be a decision-making body and that they would be consulted at the appropriate time. And Levy actually got a little bit angry with the chief of service. He said that they were whining about not being included. And what he did do is send an email back explaining to the chiefs why they need not be included at this point in time. So once again, his communication skills were up to par. So March was the announcement of the task force. And in addition to this, he was dealing with problems with the COO at this time. But, there were 5 steering committees for those task forces. They included how we bill for and collect funds for patient care, how we determine what supplies and equipment are best used to care for patients, and how we get those at the best possible prices. What is the best way to organize and deliver and bill for outpatient services, how to increase the number of patients visiting our hospital, and also how to determine the appropriate scope and scale of our academic programs. So those were the task forces implemented in order to begin to tackle the problems that the hospital was facing. There was what was defined as a kitchen cabinet of major department heads, which included medicine, surgery, obstetrics, radiology, and pathology. And one of the main problems was that they tended to not agree with each other. There was consideration of acquiring Glover Hospital in Needham. It was something as noted as a future strategic initiative. In addition to this, Emmanuel College, there was talk about them leasing some of the buildings. And there was an email sent out in response to the chiefs attempting to explain budget variances. This is another form of Levy's communication being up to par. What he said is that with a few exceptions, most of the explanations are not sufficient to permit the board to have a good understanding of what has driven volumes to be above or below the estimates we have in the budget. And he also noted that their credibility as an organization would be judged by their ability to explain what is happening here. So the chiefs did a less than satisfactory job of explaining budget variances, and Levy communicated that to them. So there was a little bit of dissent there, but it did all get worked out. And in addition to this, there was a request from the care group CFO to sell the hospital, but Levy declined that once again. All right, April had a lot to do with the dissolution of the care group. That was definitely discussed. Their market position had been eroded by decisions made regarding the sale of the Waltham Hospital. They did things in spite of advice. Levy claimed at one point that they may be incompetent. And a big thing that has to do with the dissolution of the care group is the effect on bondholders. They would truly be affected by the dissolution. They should be taken care of as they ultimately rule. And there was an assessment of the COO at this point in time that Levy was becoming increasingly disappointed with their performance. How to approach the bondholders was also discussed. It was important to work out details about the dissolution of the care group before talking to bondholders. There was really no hurry to meet with them and to perhaps bring in a professional negotiator. As a corporate governing structure, it would dissolve by October 1st, 2002. So they had a few months to work with, and they were just discussing how to best approach the bondholders. In addition to this, Levy was responding to frequently asked questions about the hospital, some of which were, how are we doing? Are the bonds in default? What's up with the care group? And is there any good news? And at this point, there's communication between the COO and CFO, who I mentioned before. Levy was becoming a little bit disappointed with their performance. So that's where the communication was really persisting and was another one of Paul's strong suits. All right, May, there was a reduction of the board of directors, and there was the first meeting of a smaller board of directors. Notes from this meeting included that they need a new COO, a new chief of orthopedics. They need a clear statement of programmatic priorities that will enhance financial capabilities in real estate, and that he was pleased with other personnel matters. And he defined the loss of the care group at this point as ambivalent. The COO was fired, and the chief of orthopedics at this point was also asked to step down. It was said that the Beth Israel Deaconess was trimming their losses. Presidents at this point were negotiating an agreement for the dissolution of care group to proceed. Paul sent an email out to board members who had been interfering with developmental issues, and in addition to this, there was another round of variance explanations. So that concludes May. June and July. June had a lot to do with setting performance goals for the chiefs. In addition to this, BIDMC acquired Glover Hospital in Needham. There was capacity planning. Bond insurers were balking at the dissolution plan of the care group, so that was still ongoing at this point in time. And then Levy addressed nursing issues, and there was an email he sent out regarding the nursing, and I think what I liked here that Levy did was he acknowledged the importance of the nursing staff. He said he receives letters every week in which a patient or a family member or a member of our physician staff or referring physician sets forth a touching and thoughtful story of the difference made an individual in the OR, the ICU, or a floor had made. And in addition to this, BIDMC has long been the hallmark of the nursing practice at BIDMC had long been a hallmark of their success and reputation for excellent patient care. In July, the concept of research was brought up again, as they do have a Harvard affiliation. It was emphasized that research still does matter. And at this point, a new COO was identified, and it was Levy's 6 months as the CEO. And at this point in time, the financial results were better than budgeted for. There had actually been 2 profitable months, and Levy was setting performance objectives for chiefs. But I think what was most important is that he discouraged people to look at the financials specifically and get more of a qualitative approach of how the hospital was doing at this point in time. So that concludes the information from the case study. Now what we're going to do is tie it all together with some of the course materials. So I chose to look at our textbook, the Rainey text from 2009. We are going to examine chapters 13 and 14. So this is chapter 13, Managing Organizational Change and Development. So it says that change within an organization can happen purposefully or spontaneously. And I think what Levy did here is took a really purposeful approach to the institution. He came in with a purpose from the beginning with his notion about the Hunter report. He came in ready to tackle it and ready to move forward. And in addition to this, all of his plans seem to be very calculated. Max Weber discussed routinization of charisma, how leaders' goals will be pursued based on charisma, which we'll talk about a little bit more concerning a different article. It also talked about bureaus and how there's a 3-stage life, including struggle for autonomy, rapid expansion, and deceleration. So I think the departments in the hospital at this point were rather autonomous, but Levy focused on the rapid expansion and how to best use resources to get each department to function as efficiently as possible. Linden discussed the concept of innovation and how an innovative manager can make an organization more effective. And there were 7 characteristics outlined of an innovative manager, which include strategic action, holding on and letting go, creating a felt need for change, starting with concrete change, using structural changes, dealing with risk, and using political skills, all of which Levy encompassed. He used his political skills when dealing with the Attorney General. He created a felt need for change by communication with employees. He used structural changes by creating the task forces, and he really encompassed all the aspects of an innovative manager. And Quinn and Cameron talked about the 4 stages of organizational life cycle, which has to do with entrepreneurial, collectivity, formalization and control, and elaboration. All right, so we'll move on to chapter 14, Advancing Effective Management in the Public Sector. So the performance of public organizations outlined. Efficiency and productivity were one of the big performance criteria, which we had a chance of examining through this case study. Peters and Waterman talked about in search of excellence and how productivity can happen through people and how it's possible to achieve extraordinary results with ordinary people, which is something I think that Paul did a really good job of. What he did is he really communicated his expectations to people in order to achieve those extraordinary results with ordinary people. In my experience, and I think in life, uncommunicated expectations can often lead to disappointment and resentment, so I think that open communication was one of Levy's strong suits. There was an emphasis on autonomy and teamwork, also discussed by Peters and Waterman. Some of the aspects of this include a bias for action, staying close to the customer, which definitely was done through emphasis on the nursing program, also valuing autonomy and entrepreneurship, enhancing productivity through people, a hands-on value-driven approach, sticking to the knitting, a simple form and lean staff, and simultaneous loose and tight properties. And the concept of total quality management was also introduced. It's a general movement or philosophy of management with 14 tenets. Some of that has to do with statement of company aims for all employees to see, which means publishing things, which is something we saw Levy do over and over again. Have everyone in the company learn and adopt new philosophy, constantly improve production systems, training, teach leadership skills, and encourage self-improvement. Fear, trust, and a climate of innovation, using teams to pursue optimal achievement of company goals, which we saw done again and again with the task forces. Eliminating numerical production quotas, which was encouraged at the end of Levy's 6 months when he encouraged people to not focus on the financials, although they were looking better. And removing barriers to pride of workmanship. So that's a little bit more about total quality management. And then we had the Shine article from 2004, which talks more about charisma, which was mentioned before. It was noted that leaders get their message across through charisma. Leaders who have it are rare, and their impact is often hard to predict. And that actually has a lot to do with culture formation. It said that leaders embed the assumptions that they hold and thereby create the conditions for culture formation. And there were 6 primary embedding mechanisms for this. It had to do with what leaders pay attention to, measure, and control on a regular basis, how leaders react to critical incidents and organizational crises, and arguably this whole situation was an organizational crisis. It talked about how leaders allocate resources, deliberate role modeling, teaching, and coaching, how leaders allocate rewards and status, how leaders recruit, select, promote, and excommunicate leaders. And we saw that done really well too with the COO and the CFO, who both needed to be let go. There had been ongoing communication with them, and it was clearly communicated to them what needed to happen until they stepped down, and he did fill those positions also once they had stepped down. So he did a really good job of using those 6 primary embedding mechanisms. So overall, Levy, we talked about charisma. He's a very charismatic leader. He was able to really rally the troops and create an environment where people could excel. He focused a lot on teamwork by really encouraging each department to do the best they can do. He encompassed the 6 primary embedding mechanisms, which we discussed. He was innovative in his approach, and nonetheless, he was successful. So he really encompassed a lot of the things that we learned in our course. And I think one of his strongest suits was communication with employees. And I think if that had not been done, if the Hunter Report had not been made available to everyone, things may not have turned out as well as they did for Levy. But overall, did a great job. There isn't a lot that I would say that he did wrong. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'm signing off.